Hi guys, welcome to my video presentation, and my video presentation title is different between asset backed and asset based and what is the consequences to the ownership if the suku is default. Let's move on into the video part. First is suku. Suku as it origin in the Arabic term and it literally refers to certificate. Specifically, suku is a debt instrument that is arranged by the issuers to accumulate wealth from investors or suku holders and supply it to the deficit unit called business entity. In general, there are three main parties involved in the suku issuance, which is consists of business entity, SPV or issuers, and the suku holders. From the Islamic perspective, the tangibility and existence of an asset is very important since it principally protects the right of involved parties in suku issuance and later transactions. In this case, Islam prefers real estate compared to their asset in the form of cash, debt, and receivables. As such, many argue that the type of involved asset in the suku structure and chosen contract do affect the right and obligation of all involved parties, especially in the event of default. The establishment and fulfillment of issuers' obligation to investors are closely linked to several factors, which is consists of type of contract used in the suku issuance, the status of suku either categorized as asset-based or asset-backed, the performance of business entity receiving the fund from suku holders through the issuers or SPV. In this section, we are going to explore the difference between asset-based suku and asset-backed suku and their consequences to the ownership if the suku is default. First is asset-backed suku. Asset-based suku involve the issuers purchasing the underlying asset and then investing, trading, or leasing them on the behalf of the investors who is the suku holders using the fund raised through the issue certificate called suku. This structure most often take the guise of a sale lease to the originator and is embedded with the binding promise, which is called as Wahid Muslim from the originator to repurchase the underlying asset at maturity. In this structure, the suku holders can only require the originator to purchase the underlying asset. As such, the suku holders have unsecured debt claim against the originator and void with the payment of the purchase price following an acquisition of the binding purchase price. This implies that the suku holders does not have recourse to the underlying asset and underlying assets are not used as collateral. Asset-based suku guarantee only beneficial ownership to the suku holders so that in case of default, the investors would be left without any claim on these assets. In this structure, the originator typically transfer the investors only the beneficial ownership of the SPV issuers, but Sharia stimulates a transfer of assets to suku holders. However, since investors have no recourse to the asset, the structure does not pay attention to the asset risk, but rather concentrate on the creditworthiness of the sponsor of the suku. Let's move on into the next part, which is asset-backed suku. Asset-based suku involves guaranteeing the investors who is the suku holders a share of tangible asset or business ventures along with the corresponding share of the total risk, that is a share commensurate with the ownership. In this structure, there is a true sales transaction where the originator sells the underlying asset to the SPV that hold this asset and issues this asset back to them. The buyer of the suku does not have recourse to the originator if payments are less than usual. A true sales implies that the asset of the issuer will not be added to the asset of originator in the case of default and liquidation. The suku holders must be assume any loss in the case of impairment of suku asset. Asset-backed suku are thus closer to equity than debt, and for that reason, it is not so popular in the market of suku offerings. This is a summary of the differences between asset-backed suku and asset-based suku. Asset-backed suku is issued by SPV, however, asset-based suku is issued by company. The process of asset-backed suku is involved tangible asset, however, asset-based suku involve receivables. Asset-backed suku is like equity, asset-based suku is like debt. The revenue of asset-backed suku is generated by underlying asset, however, asset-based suku involve originated cash flow. The legal ownership of asset-based suku is right to dispose the underlying asset. However, asset-based suku only involve beneficial ownership with no rights to dispose the underlying asset. The suku holders cannot recourse to originator in the best asset-backed suku. However, suku holders can recourse to originator if there is shortfall in payment in asset-based suku. Asset-based suku is compatible with Sharia compliance. However, asset-based suku is not compatible with Sharia compliance. Let's move into the next section, which is the consequences to the ownership if the asset-based suku and asset-based suku is default. First is consequences if the asset-based suku is default to the ownership. Asset-based suku is granted only beneficial ownership to the suku holders. So in that case of default, the investor would be left without any claim on this asset. Consequences if asset-backed suku is default to the ownership. The buyer of suku does not recourse to the originator if payments are less than usual. A true sales implies that the asset of the issuer will not be added to the asset of originator in the event of default or liquidation. That's all for my video presentation. Thank you.